My name is Jay Seaton. I'm the publisher of the Daily Sentinel. I don't need to tell you about the divisions in this country and in this community. The elephant in the room is social media. What follows is a panel discussion with the filmmakers behind the documentary The Social Dilemma and about 30 members of this community. We really wanted to involve the entire community in this discussion, but COVID restrictions prohibited it. So our ask is that you watch the documentary and then watch this panel discussion and then take the discussion home. Reflect on it personally. Reflect on your use of social media. Talk to your family about it. Talk to your communities about it. And then let us know what changed for you, if anything. And you can let us know at yousaidit@gjsentinel.com or send a letter to the editor. We don't take a position in this issue. We're agnostic, but we are interested in what your perceptions are. So please enjoy.
Yeah, so I'm going to direct the first question at Jeff. And if any of you guys want to add to, again, we just kind of want this to be a dialogue. But Jeff, first of all, why did you write the film? Did you have some personal experience that helped you write this film or want to write this film?
Yeah, so many thoughts to that one. And just a couple things to preface. Feel free to throw us all the questions that anybody has. We will do, I feel like we can tackle most everything at this point and having these conversations, and especially with Alex joining us here today with his experience at the companies themselves. One of the things that we as a team experienced so heavily, some of our past films were actually about climate change. And we were documenting climate change around the world in different ways. As we were sharing that film, we found that a lot of the audiences that we engaged with didn't have the same information about climate change. We had access to scientists and we were talking to scientists, but we met a lot of people when traveling around with that film that had a different understanding or perspective on climate change. And that's both understandable, but that also posed the question to us around why does our country have so many divergent perspectives on climate, as just one example of many examples. That was, I think, in the back of our minds for a long time. And then when we came with, when the opportunity for this film really surfaced in around 2017, some of the subjects that we were talking to had been inside and involved in the making and engineering and designing of some of these platforms, working whether at Twitter or Facebook or Google. And we were starting to hear from them that the way that the technology is designed is affecting society at scale in negative ways. And there was a concept called a filter bubble that we learned about back then, where people are getting different types of information based on what the algorithms are trying to feed you individually. I think for myself and for much of our team, this was sort of like a huge light bulb moment where we both wanted to understand it better and figure out how this stuff works, and then realize that this was an issue that was of great importance to society, and we wanted to do our opportunity as filmmakers to put a spotlight on it.
And we encourage all of you guys to jump in here if there's any other thoughts about why you took a particular interest in making this film.
Oh, I was just going to add that I think the question that hooked me early on was the question around if these platforms are free to the users, you can sign up for a Twitter account or a Facebook account or a TikTok account without having to pay those companies any money. You can do a Google search without paying for those Google search results. How, if these platforms are free to us, are they the richest companies in the history of humankind? Where are those hundreds of billions of dollars coming from? And sort of following that train of thought was what got me hooked into the project.
The film is it really in the form of a docudrama? And I'm curious why you guys chose that form instead of a pure documentary. You had amazing candor from some of the folks that actually design these algorithms. Why did you decide that there was something additional you had to deliver for the film?
Sorry. Well, I was just going to say probably what Jeff would say, and I think that's one of the reasons I started working with Jeff on his earlier films, Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral, was that he was on this mission to show something that had previously been unseeable, and understanding climate change for me was always difficult until I could actually see it. And this was another problem that we're all sort of dealing with that was kind of unseeable and difficult to understand, especially the scope of the problem. And so that's where the idea started to do something beyond just a documentary. Was we had to figure out a way to show this process and to show this technology that had previously been unseeable. I'll leave it at that. Vicky was more instrumental in coming up with the story of the fiction. So maybe she can add to that.
Sure. I think it was actually Jeff who originally had the idea of like, I really want to be able to show the audience what's happening on the other side of the screen. We have these great experts and insiders from the companies who are outlining for us what the business model is, how it was created, what the algorithms are doing. But when you are creating a film and you just have all these experts talking at you, it can be really hard to absorb all of that, like, you know, expert after expert. And so we wanted breathing room. We wanted to show, not just tell the audience what's going on the other side of their own phone screen, right? And I think Jeff came up with the idea of what if we took these algorithms and we turned them into people, and we showed how the algorithms are constantly working on, you know, one individual, and then we built on that idea to build out the idea of this whole family that was all being affected by technology in different ways. Even the eldest daughter of the family who doesn't use technology or doesn't use these platforms, she is affected greatly because she lives in a world where all of her family members do, 3.5 billion people do. And so we wanted to show those real world effects as well.
Vicki, I'm glad in the drama side of it, you used youth. You used like a teenager who looked like he was 17 or 18. And you also used kind of a preteen young lady as well. And I'm a foster parent. I've got 5 kids. And that honestly is what worries me most. I don't think in any other area of life do we start at getting our kids addicted to something, especially in drugs and alcohol. Let them get adults before they start introducing them to that. But with social media, they're seeing at a very early age, 10, 11, 12, probably even early at sometimes. And in the film, you guys use terms like seduction, addiction, manipulation to describe what these algorithms do to our brains. Was that the plan from Twitter and Facebook to really manipulate addiction?
Maybe that's a good one for me to take.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I've worked on these algorithms. I mentioned Twitter. I also worked on the Google. No, that was not the plan as an unintended consequence. I mean, the plan was to build a product. Well, at the end stage, the plan was to build a profitable business. And the plan to achieve that plan was to build a product that people use all the time. So we're always looking at the data we have and what we know about you and how to match those things to get things in front of you so that you use them over and over. I will say, and I have a bunch of criticisms as these companies, of these companies, but there was no nefarious plan to control people that intentionally or seditiously. Really, the plan was, if we build a product and someone uses it once and walks away, that's not useful. It's not useful to the person because they walked away. It's not useful to the company. It's not useful to our revenue streams and advertisers. The plan was around build something so that you're always interested and clicking. And I should also say the computer doesn't know the difference between this being generally useful to you and enriching your life, which is why you engage with it, and just a trick, some viral meme that is tricking you and roping you back in. It has no concept of those things. There's content that you engage with and content you don't. It doesn't know why the human is doing what they're doing. So that absolutely is a real consequence of that. And I would say it's an unintended consequence, not something that, you know, an evil person in a building ever decided was the explicit plan. But I think we're seeing that was an unintended consequence.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to add to that because I think the point that Alex is bringing up here is really in many ways the heart of the matter, and I think the heart of the conversation for this audience in particular, around the computer doesn't know why people engage with different types of content. And these are systems that are filled with user-generated content, right? So the platforms that we're talking about and most heavily criticizing are the Facebooks, Twitters, YouTubes, Google, Instagram, Snapchat, where anybody can post anything regardless of truth. And then the algorithms take all of that and feed that back out. And it really is just like throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And hey, look, this thing that somebody made, everybody's clicking on it, everybody's sharing it, everybody's watching it. It went viral. Like, we used to think of viral as being a very good thing with these platforms, apparently. But the computers and the algorithms are doing that with no insight about, as Alex is saying, if it's accurate, if it's true, if it's good for you or not, if it's good for society or not, and with no sense of what the political type of content might be, or which way it might be pushing you, and whether it's bringing you towards a shared truth or pushing you away from it. I think these are things that we can continue to talk about over this time today, but I think in many ways that's so heavily the crux of the conversation around political polarization in the way we see this unfolding through these platforms.
And just as a subpart to that question, I think that's what firms have done historically when they're trying to sell their product, right? Is to keep people coming back. So if they want them to drink more soda or use more tobacco, if you will, they want them to keep coming back. They make it attractive. What makes social media, and I think you touched on it a bit, Jeff, but what makes social media so distinctive, so different from selling a product?
Yeah. In my mind, it has to do in such a really, really deep way with the individualized feeds that we are all getting. We are all getting personalized feeds. First of all, the concept of personalized news seems so oxymoronic to me. Like, news should be like a shared central truth, not like my version of the news. I want to just share this one analogy that I think brings us together, and it's something I've been thinking about lately. And it's an analogy around evolution and Darwin. But if you think of the Galapagos Island as this place where we saw how different species are like forming in different ways, each of us now, everybody with their own personal news feed, is on their own individual island. The algorithms, the machine learning algorithms, really are just evolution. They're just testing everything. We are changing our ideas, our thoughts are changing based on what the algorithms show us every day. And those islands are now drifting apart from each other. And some people might be drifting together in one direction, and other people are drifting together in a different direction. And we don't have insight into what the other groups are seeing. I can't see your island of information because your Twitter experience is so completely different than my Twitter experience. And the fear that I have, not to mention like how we've gotten into such a bad place over the last decade, but my fear is what the next decade looks like if these platforms continue to exist. Because in my mind, the guaranteed output of individual machine learning algorithms feeding us all individual content on a daily basis, evolving our thinking in divergent ways, we will be more and more and more polarized over time as a guaranteed output of these systems. That to me is frightening. That is absolutely frightening in my mind. It has no regard for truth. It has no regard for a shared story, a shared culture. And it puts us at odds with each other. These systems and these platforms are putting us at odds with each other.
I've got a follow-up question, but I want to know if you guys have more to say on that subject.
Yeah, I agree with all that. One thing I would add is social media is both a new phenomenon and not a new phenomenon. And it's doing something that we've been trending towards, more separation, for quite some time. It's just so powerful and so good at it because now we're throwing machine learning and all this computational power that you emerge this new property. So maybe a good example, a scary example, but a good example is war. People fighting and trying to kill each other is not a new phenomenon. It's been going on forever. It's just at the beginning, the tools were so primitive that you couldn't destroy the planet, right? People would throw sticks at each other, and then someone invented the sword, and then the machine gun, and then the nuclear weapon was really different. So it's not that it wasn't drifting in that direction, just the tools became so powerful that you have these terrifying new consequences. And social media is like that too. I mean, if you look back at, pick the moon landing, I was not alive for the moon landing, but I've read about it and talked to my parents about it. And as far as I understand, essentially the whole country turned on CBS and listened to Walter Cronkite. There was like one news and you might think different things about it after that, but in every household that had a television, there was one person on giving you the news, and then you could debate about it, but there was a shared base. And you fast forward a little bit, and then there were multiple broadcast networks, and then with the advent of cable television and some rules around being more two-sided that didn't apply to cable television. I mean, the things like the Fairness Doctrine. We already started splintering, and then the advent of all the talk radio stations that you saw that. And to this day in this country, if you drive in different states and different areas, your selection of media and sources and opinions you can listen to are very different depending on where you are. So social it's just continuing this trend. It's just that Twitter and Google, like the nuclear weapon, it's the same thing. It's just so massively powerful now that we get this new emergent behavior where literally every single person can have their own view of what's real and what's true.
In the film, there's a stat that fake news travels 6 times faster than true information, and that truth is boring. Why do you think this is, and why is outrage and negativity so much more prevalent on social media platforms than in our regular lives? Why does it go dark?
I've been really fascinated throughout the making of this film and beyond by this concept of the attention economy. Our attention has value and it's for sale. We're not paying for these big social products, but someone is paying, and we all know that they're fueled by advertiser dollars. But that is all a result of the value, someone recognizing the value of our attention and the value of the shift in our perception that we're not even aware of. We think, I can look at this and I like to see these ads. These are ads that are relevant to things that I need. I like to see these stories featured from people in my news feed. I like to see these stories that rag on politicians that I don't like. This is working for me. But we are, in some cases, unaware of how we're being polarized from each other and the benefit to these advertisers. This is really a very extractive business model that uses our attention to benefit a third party that we don't see.
If I can tack onto that one, I echo all your points there, Stacey. And I think one of the things that we learned in the making of the film that didn't quite get into the film, there's such a big difference between what we're willing to pay for versus what we're willing to consume passively. If you think about paying to go into a movie theater to watch a movie, you're gonna like check a review, you're hearing your friend's recommendation, you're thinking, oh, I'm going to enjoy this movie. I'm going to like it. Humans have vetted it. People have made it. Like it went through all these hoops to get into the movie theater for somebody to go and enjoy. That's such a completely different experience than everybody and anybody with good intent or with bad intent pushing anything that may or may not be accurate onto the internet and onto these platforms that I am more than willing to sit back and scroll and just scroll through. And some of them are going to make me laugh. Some of them are going to be outraged. One of the big things that we've discovered in this process is that the things that rile up deep emotions and oftentimes negative emotions are the things that are very, very successful on these platforms. If these platforms can get you to be angry, and once again, I think to Alex's point, like no engineer sat there behind the computer thinking, how am I going to, piss off millions of people, right? That wasn't the goal. The goal was like, how do we keep people engaged? How do we find things that people want to look at? And what we've discovered in that process is that unfortunately, the things that piss people off tend to do really, really well on these platforms and rile people up. So the notion that Stacey's bringing up around attention and where we place our attention and what we're willing to consume passively, I think that's a real unfortunate scenario that we've found ourselves in with the way these companies have developed.
It's also something that, again, has existed. It's not just that rumors and salacious things spread more quickly on social media than truthful, balanced things. That's true. That's also true in real life too. I mean, think back to being in high school and what rumors would run around the school in 2 seconds versus what pieces of information would never spread. It's just that it's easier to do it on social media. And it's also the case, seeing things that make you think you're wrong or question your worldview are complicated and can be uncomfortable at times and interesting at times. But a very small number of things in life are these binary outcome, black and white things. There are 2 sides, and my side is 100% right, and the other side is 100% wrong. But that stuff can kind of spread. And one thing when you think about it is the world is actually fairly complicated, and there's extremely complicated, and many issues on which people feel strongly have tons of shades of gray. And that does not jive with our human nature and what we want to respond to, and the rumors that spread around the high school cafeteria and all that sort of human psychology. That doesn't drive with that. But now social media is so effective at pushing that, and that feedback loop is so tight that there's more and more of the black and white, 100% wrong, 0% correct sort of stuff. But the world hasn't gotten simpler. The world is still full of lots of shades of gray. And I think that's why we're diverging from, our views on social media are diverging from how the world actually is.
Completely with you on that, Alex. But there is also a dynamic that we're seeing happen, in particular via Facebook groups, for example. Like if I have a dissenting opinion and I share it with this group of people and somebody says, you're way off, this is inaccurate, here's some research, I would check myself in that assessment or that thinking. What some of the research is showing that within Facebook groups in particular, when dissenting views come up, those get squashed down as opposed to accessed and explored. So the dynamic that we're starting to see on these platforms is actually exiling dissenting opinion as opposed to embracing, which then creates its own feedback cycles, right? So now you don't have anybody in the group or any opportunity or, and these platforms are not good. Like we can have a really nuanced, in-depth conversation via Zoom right now. We're all talking. We can spend an hour plus going in depth with questions. You can't turn this conversation into a tweet storm, right? You can't, like any 140 characters is such a decontextualizing of this conversation. All the nuance would be lost. Anybody can come in and read one sentence and be like, no, you're crazy, that's wrong. And then that spirals into its own outrage cycle as a result of that. So I think part of it, from my perspective, is that these platforms aren't great places to have civic conversation, right? They were not designed for that. They were never intended to think, how do we bring a group of people together to hold space together in a community and figure out how to deal with the problems and the things that we're struggling with. Yet we use these platforms as the place to duke out our ideas in a way that is incredibly counterproductive.
Yep.
I think that's a great, go ahead, Alex.
You see my real face and my real name's at the bottom, and I know you in real life, and I see your real face and your name's at the bottom. This is much less likely to go off the rails screaming at each other than, you know, I'm just at blah, blah, blah name. You don't know who I really am. I'm hiding behind the keyboard and you can't see me.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with you guys on that respect. And on a micro level, that's what we're trying to do with this group, is get together with people on other side of the aisle with disparate views and say, hey, you've got 2 eyes and nose and 2 ears and kids. I can relate to you. Let's talk this out in real life. Obviously, really hard to do in social media where you do have this silo effect or filter bubble, I think as you guys refer to it. At least on this level, on a macro level. And I know we're just kind of spitballing a little bit, but how do you fix it? Where do we go from here? I mean, I think that's the question everybody in this room is asking, is where do we go from here?
I'm happy to throw in my comments, but I'd like to wait and see if anybody else wants to jump in with thoughts to kick it off.
One thought I have about it is, you know, as everyone was just talking about so eloquently, we have this algorithm that, and Shoshana in our film talks about how the algorithms at Facebook and Google are radically indifferent. They have no idea if something is true. They have no idea if they're showing you something that's hurting your feelings. They have no idea if they're picking at your fears, your doubts, or your insecurities. All they know is that it's working. You're looking at the thing. And unfortunately, our brains have been wired to look at things that we think are scary, things that we think are outrageous, things that confirm insecurities about ourselves. Or so I think that the algorithm is like, oh, this is I'm doing my job right. I'm getting people to look. It has no idea. The way that it's getting people to look is through division, through outrage, through the vulnerabilities of each of our own fears, doubts, and insecurities. But at this point, the designers can see that effect is happening. So I think just the way that the designers at one point in time designed this algorithm to mine our attention, they are smart people. And there are other smart people who are not in that design world yet, whose voices need to be heard, that could then potentially design and redirect this algorithm to solve a problem that we all really care about solving. So now you have these like incredibly powerful supercomputers, and the only thing we've asked them to do is addict our our teenagers to TikTok. Like, let's ask more of the algorithm and get it to do something that actually serves humanity. And I think Tristan and his organization like are working in that vein with the Center for Humane Technology. And I think like having people think about, is this technology treating me humanely? Having designers think about, is this technology going to be humane when I design it? And having regulators think about regulating technology to push it in that direction are like the way we need to go.
I really echo what Vicki said. And I think to your question, you're really asking like, how can we better balance the use of technology in our own lives? Like knowing that our attention is being leveraged for profit. How can we understand that the way that we consume information is being influenced? And how can that make us more skeptical, educated, informed consumers of information? How can we question something that we read and then take the next step to follow through to find out if it is indeed worth believing? I think Kathy O'Neill, who's also in the film, also has said a computer doesn't have a better proxy for truth than a click. So if what everyone clicks on, people come up with the notion that, I'm seeing this everywhere, it must be true. Having that skeptical filter on things that we consume and recognizing the way we're manipulated and how we consume information is a step toward resisting the effects of these technologies.
I have a bunch of, I'll try and keep some thoughts really concise right here, but one of the interviews that we did that didn't make its way into the film was with somebody named Dr. Robert Lustig. And one of the things that he shared with us is, we were sold on the idea that these platforms are about connection, but they're not real connection. They are connectivity and the ability to have like nodes connect with each other. But real connection, as we're talking about here through the Zoom, we can see each other's faces. We know who each other is. The mirror neurons in the back of your brain light up. You see and engage with physical body language in a way that doesn't come through on social media or on these platforms. So I bring that up just from the perspective of recognizing, while we think these things might be connecting us with people, to recognize that they're not. The depth and the nuance that we can have in this conversation is so completely different than you can have on social media. And with that as sort of a framework, if your community, if there's any community that is going through these tensions, separate these conversations from these platforms. Just as you're doing right now, bring people together in real life, have face-to-face conversations as best as we can do in COVID. But how do we get back to real human-to-human engagement and not let these social media platforms dictate and guide and manipulate what we think are the conversations in our communities? I've removed myself from all social media in the making of this film. I was a very, very heavy Facebook user, used Twitter pretty regularly. I stopped using all of those platforms in the making of the film. I now get information from a diverse group of news outlets that I pay for. I try to pay them if I can, and then engaging with people directly and moving off of these platforms that I don't think have our best interests at heart.
I want to ask Alex, why did you agree to be in this film? And you and the other subjects of the film were extremely candid and had strong opinions about what these companies and algorithms were doing. Why did you agree to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I should say that those opinions have formed over time. And I think, and you can call this naive, or maybe it was obvious, or maybe with the benefit of hindsight, it's obvious. At the time, and so I worked at Twitter from 2010 to 2016. And at the time we thought that, yes, it's not 100% good, it's not 100% bad, but we felt that overall it was good. It was a good thing for the world. We were connecting people and they were talking, and there were examples, and we would talk in the halls about things like the Arab Spring revolution in the Middle East years ago. That was enabled by Twitter, and overthrew some repressive governments. And there were a lot of examples of this where this ability that everyone in the world has a microphone, and it's not just the powerful, was really good. And we always believed that. And I think over time, this flip side of that power to give everyone a microphone, coupled with the amplification from these algorithms, there are more and more examples where it's not good. And certainly in this country, I think that's gotten far more extreme in the last 4.5 years since I worked there. And the reason I agreed to be in the film is I don't think people know how these work or what's happening and why. And I thought it was important to get people. And one thing I feel very proud about playing a small part in the film is that I think it has driven a bunch of these conversations and meetups such as your own and all the outreach that, you know, everyone else on this call are doing to get people to think about that. It's easy to not think about it. Okay, I'm just seeing things. But if you know a little bit more about why you're seeing the things and are those different than what other people are seeing, my hope is that it will help us all be more thoughtful and get back to this world. Human beings are very smart. Get back to this world, not of passive consumption, even though we're sort of evolutionarily wired to think of, you know, good and bad, black and white, and get us back to this world of, actually, there's a lot more going on and there are a lot more shades of gray. And I thought helping to explain, having been on the inside and knowing how these work, helping to explain what's happening and why would contribute to that.
So I got one more. I'm going to jump in here, Cody. So I'm going to poll each of you guys, but you know, the film talked a lot about how these platforms tickle a very vulnerable part of our brain, a part of the brain associated with addiction, and there was some discussion with each of the subjects of the film about what is their addiction of these social media platforms. And so I'm going to ask you guys, what is your addiction? And Jeff, you've already answered it, but you know, is there something that's taking the place of these platforms for you?
I think it was for a long time social media, Facebook in particular for me. My process of weaning myself off of Facebook, I replaced it with news apps. And I would say that news still is that addictive tendency for me, that desire to pull, to refresh and see what the latest thing is. And I have my own processes for how I manage that. I only give it a certain amount of time. If I go through, you know, an app and go top to bottom, when I get to the bottom, it's done. And it's like, it's not an infinite scroll based on which news app I'm looking at the time. But yeah, it's also, I think in large part, just being aware of it and recognizing it so that I can engage with it and control it in a different way.
By the way, Jeff, I'm a newspaper guy. You're my new best friend. So, can we just go, Alex, you're next on the screen.
Sure. So I'm off I still have a Twitter account. I very, very rarely tweet if it's some work related thing, and I think it'll help. I will do that. I'm off those, but I think I'm still pretty addicted to my phone, whether it's work, email, and Slack, or just random other things. And, you know, one of the most terrifying, sad parts of the movie for me, where I think it was Tim was talking about how he was home. He just come home from a long day at work, and his 1 or 2 or 3-year-old, very young son, like wanted to play with him. And he was like hiding in the closet, like checking one more thing for work or for whatever it was. And like, that really hit home for me. I think these are, even social aside, you know, the screen and the blue light and the email and the pings and the notification, that's intense. So I try to be intentional about it, but it's hard. And the one thing I will say is, it's funny to think, you know, when we leave our house now without our phone, we feel naked. Like we can't, what if I need to call someone? What if I get lost? What if blah, blah, blah. But we've gone almost our whole lives without a supercomputer in our pocket every time we go out our front door, and people just aren't en masse falling down dead after being lost in the woods. Yeah. So I would say, like, leave your house without your phone more. It feels really, really good. It's weird how hard for me it is to do it, but when I do it, it feels really good. So that's kind of my anti-addiction pill regimen that I'm on at the moment.
Davis, you're next on the screen.
You know, I was never a big user of social media. I probably was the most guilty of scrolling through Instagram a lot in a sort of voyeuristic way. I've stopped posting for the most part to any of the platforms since I started working on this film. So, you know, I can't tell you what replaced it other than, you know, the news sites that I frequent and some of which I pay for. I've recently, I think after this last election, I just tried to wean myself off the news in general. And I've just been reading a lot of books, you know, so I read books on my device, and I find that is a pretty good use of this technology.
Stacy?
bring this up as it may be relevant to some of you all in the community. I'm a mom of a very little girl. And when she was born, I joined one of those Facebook groups that was like the neighborhood mommies, and quickly was like sucked into all of the conversations about the community and what people are doing with their children, and the exchanging and the buying and the selling, and starting to work on this film and deciding to close my Facebook account. That was something I was worried about missing out on. Like, suddenly I'll be shut out of this community. I won't know what's happening anymore. So I really noticed the hook of the Facebook groups as a strong pull to stay on Facebook. I did resist it, and feel great about that. So not to say I'm immune to the addiction, the addictive nature of the phone, still feel that adrenaline or that dopamine hit when I get a notification that I have mail related to work or a colleague or friend. So recognizing it's work in progress.
Vicky.
Yeah, I used to have, I still, technically the accounts exist for my Facebook account and my Instagram account, but I used to have the apps on my phone. And especially with Instagram, I would find that my finger was just like hitting the Instagram icon, and I was scrolling like almost before I even noticed that's what was happening. It was how I was filling downtime, just in, compulsively. And it didn't really bother me in the moment, because it was like, whatever, this is fun for 2 minutes until my next thing starts. But as I got into making this film, I got more and more sort of disgusted by the idea that anytime I was clicking into that app, I was feeding this algorithm, and I was training it how to understand people. I was training it like how quickly I scroll, what I stop and look at. I can't help but be training the algorithm if I'm on there. And to know that like another tentacle of this algorithm is feeding fake viral news to people in Myanmar and causing and amplifying an ethnic cleansing event that's still going on against Rohingya Muslims, just grossed me out. And so I think, like, even though it didn't feel like it was having any super negative consequences for my own life, the idea that I was feeding a thing that was having all these negative consequences elsewhere ruined the fun of scrolling. And so I removed the apps from my phone, and I just didn't go back to those platforms. It actually made me realize how little they were contributing to my life, how easy it was for me to get by without them once they were gone. And I will say that I'm still like definitely looking at my phone too often, especially in the pandemic, when it's kind of my only way to connect with friends and family that I don't directly live with. So I do still have to work on checking news less, checking email less, but it was definitely a good start, and I was really surprised how little I missed it when I got rid of it.
There's one thing that Vicky and I did at the very start of this project that I'd like to just share and recommend to those of you in the audience today. We were starting this very early on, and I grabbed her phone and gave her my phone, and we looked at each other's feeds. And I had insight into what Vicky was seeing on her, I think it was Instagram or Facebook feed at the time, and she was seeing my Facebook feed. And these are total, like, good friends, known each other for a long time, lots of similar friends, completely different feeds that we were experiencing. And it was sort of just like this light bulb of her Facebook world was so different than my Facebook world. And if there's somebody in the audience today that you disagree with, I've been suggesting do a reality swap. Like, literally, here's my phone, let me see your phone. What are you seeing every day? This is what I'm seeing every day. Can that be an opportunity to just build a bridge and find some empathy and around, like, oh, wait a second, like that, I haven't heard that, and that doesn't seem right. And you're going to feel that on both sides, likely, I would suspect. I mean, obviously, this is going to be different for each and every one of you out there, but it's something that I would just encourage as an exercise, just to give yourself a brief glimpse into how personalized and customized these platforms are for each and every one of us.
And it's not even just those platforms. So a thing that I do sometimes, I don't do it all the time, but I get in these habits when I do it, is I just have one browser open when I have two tabs open. I have Fox News open, and I have MSNBC open. And just at the end of the day, I have some concept of what happened that day. And I just read both of them. And it's fascinating, both on what topics are discussed at all on tab A or tab B, but also when there are cases when they discuss the same thing, how they talk about them differently. And there was only one day that happened. So there was some set of things that actually happened and a bunch that didn't. And it's really, it takes longer. It's uncomfortable, but it's fascinating. And it gives a glimpse into this thing that, again, social media is so good at this. It feels like a different phenomenon. It's not a different phenomenon. It's just so much more powerful that it's causing the majority of the harm from this hyperpolarization. But I think that I found that's a very educational, kind of interesting activity. I would encourage everyone to do it.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, Alex. I don't have the willpower that you guys have. You guys are superhuman individuals for doing that. But and I'm being tongue in cheek a little bit, but I found myself, not being able to delete apps or things like that, or you just re-download them when you want to look at them. And so I think it's interesting. iPhone has this new app out where you can limit your exposure to these apps. Well, so I implemented that after 6 p.m., but then you can just override and it's almost pointless. So I actually gave my passcode to my wife for that. And so after 6 p.m., unless I get her permission, I can't be on after 6 p.m. And for the first time, I found myself sitting on the couch with nothing to do when you didn't have that before. And just like looking at the kids play and literally having nothing to do. I can't grab my phone, all my apps are shut down. And I'm just sitting there reflecting. And it's like, it's such a refreshing, at first it creates a lot of anxiety, right? Like I need to be doing something, but over time it's refreshing just to sit there and do nothing. So that I found that encouraging, but.
Yeah, absolutely. I had the opportunity to meet one of the people who were one of the senior designers of the iPhone itself, and was on basically one of the key people in building the iPhone. And they have a rule in their family where at the dinner table, nobody's allowed to bring the phone to the dinner table, like no phones at the dinner table. And they have an exception where if everybody at the dinner table unanimously agrees that they want to look something up. So if we're having a conversation about something and wait a second, what is that actually the source on that? And let's look it up together. But aside from that, like the person who helped invent this thing doesn't want it at the dinner table. It's like that for them is a sacred space where it doesn't exist.
And I totally agree. And so my last question, and I kind of wanted to poll the audience a little bit, but it was, parents in the room, having seen this, having gone through this, would you still let your kids, if you had to go back and do it all again? I know a lot of you kids probably are on social media and it's kind of hard to get them off now, but if you could go back and do it when they were 8, 9, 10, when they first got on, would you do it again, or would you keep them off social media? And I'm just curious, raise your hand if you would not let them on social media until they're a lot older. You guys probably can't see it, but most people in the room are raising their hands. And my oldest kid is 12, he's almost 13. I still haven't let him on social media. I was hoping to last till 14 or 15, but now I'm like, no, you're gonna be adult, buddy, before you get on social media from this. And one of the ladies in the audience, Janet, she told a story of her daughter, her granddaughter, who she told her she was gonna be on this Zoom call with you guys today. And she told her to tell you guys that you guys have ruined my life because she's not on social media anymore. So
good to know.
Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question though, for those of you in the audience, if you could do it all over again for yourself, would you have gone on social media or not? Like who would not have gone on social media?
Again,
It's about a half.
yeah, a little over half.
So let me ask another question. After seeing this documentary, did any of you change your social media habits?
I did.
Wow.
Not half.
Wow.
So for you guys, do you allow your kids? And if you don't have kids, would you allow your kids on these platforms?
Go.
I have
think I'm the only non-parent on this group. I'm realizing. Yeah.
I have kids that they're too young, and I dread the day that they start asking for phones because I know it'll happen. They'll come home from school and they'll say, "All my friends have phones." My wife and I used to joke that we weren't going to let them watch TV either. People with kids would laugh at us. And now I know why. So I don't know, but I definitely intend to wait until they're, in high school probably, before they're allowed to have phones. And I don't think I would let them have social media accounts right now. It'll be interesting to see how the platforms evolve in the next few years.
So we know that there's some questions from the assembled folks here that we want to get to. We we know we have limited time with you, but we want to open it up to questions.
And while we're queuing up that question, I just wanted to add to what Davis was saying. We are seeing changes in the technology where more and more phones are starting to come out that aren't smartphones. So phones that are designed for kids, that you can still make a phone call and send a text message, but you can't get all the other stuff that are part of the problems of the space. So I think we're going to see more and more growth in that area around things that are really designed to be tools again for people. So that's an exciting front.
I'm Josh. I'm a pastor of a local church here in town. And first of all, I just want to thank you for the film. I loved it. In my world, when I'm helping people in their spiritual lives, emotional lives, mental lives, I'm seeing a lot of what was talked about in the film. So thank you very much. I'm just curious how the tech companies have responded to the film. Has Mark Zuckerberg seen the film? Does he like it? Does he hate it? Is he suing you? I just want to know how they're responding. Yeah. Do they deny what's been said in the film, or are they doing anything about it?
Knock on wood, no lawsuits. But I appreciate your question there. Soon after the film was released, Facebook issued a public multi-point PDF on their About page disagreeing with the film. And then after January 6th, I think many of the companies have sort of shifted their tone and recognition of their culpability in misinformation. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that post January 6th, we've seen from Facebook, from Google, from Twitter, others, recognition that they have a much greater role in the public discourse than I think they were previously wanting to acknowledge and admit. One other thing to add, we have seen both Lindsey Graham and Nancy Pelosi reference the film publicly, encouraging, in one case, Zuckerberg and Dorsey to watch the film directly, in other cases, just general promotion of the film. So we have seen meaningful bipartisan enthusiasm and support for the themes and for the issues that we brought up in the film. I think there are very few things we can say that Lindsey Graham and Nancy Pelosi both came to consensus on.
Congratulations on that in and of itself.
Victory there. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. I am the least tech savvy person in this room. And I'm not of a generation where I need to worry about my children. I need to worry about my grandchildren. And I'm going to freely borrow from my oldest son, who is making those decisions and is also the principal of a pre-K through 8 school. And with regard to Cody's issue, because I'm into solutions. And so what do we do about this problem? And I'd like your assessment of this, because one of the things he talks to parents about is, given the social pressures of not having a phone at all, to give access to a phone, but to make it very clear, this is not your phone. This is my phone. I paid for it. And I have access to everything that is on this phone. And at 10 o'clock or whatever time you want to pick, it gets recharged. It comes away from you. It goes into my bedroom where it gets recharged, and I can look at anything that's on the phone. Can I get your assessment as to whether that is a potential approach to dealing with kids as they are trying to deal with this very pressing problem?
I worry a little bit when the conversation becomes too much about just how the technology is affecting kids, because I'm so aware of how it's affecting me and my generation and you and your generation and any users, and even people who aren't using phones but live in a world where this, rampant misinformation or rampant outragification is happening. So I think when I think about like the grand scale of what's happening, I think about like the disillusion of democracy and our inability to come together and have safe elections. And like I'm thinking about, what world will my kids live in? Not just what will their phone habits be. Well, I only have one kid, but what world will our kids live in? Not just what their phone habits will be. And I really want kids to get fired up about the injustice of these platforms and of this current system. And I think that if they become like social justice warriors against being manipulated and against someone controlling the decisions they make and against someone interfering with third-party information in their friend relationships. I think that like that might be a better path than just trying to take the candy away or regulate how much they get this sweet treat. Like I hope that we can push for education where it becomes less of a sweet treat in the first place.
I'll just add something to that. In the way that we think about the candy that Vicky is posing there, I think there in the younger generation, there is a lot of knowledge about how these apps are functioning and the addictive nature of the phones. And I think a lot of young people are indeed very aware of this and can be empowered to make a decision for themselves, maybe along with their family, about how to have moderate, reasonable use of their devices. So, people have suggested that in many cases you could have a conversation with your kids. How much time do you think is a reasonable amount of time to be on your phone? And that kids might have a reasonable answer, and then to kind of work together to stick to that as a way of getting kind of buy-in to make this use balanceable and reasonable in accordance with the other things that are important in their lives.
I also think it's great to use the film to sort of get an entire group of parents on board with smarter restrictions and or smarter conversations around technology use with their families. And then sort of all kids are in the same boat and all the parents are wary and the kids are wary of these platforms. And it can in that way potentially be less like I am personally being left out because my parent won't allow me to have a phone. And there could be like an entire school's worth of families deciding to sort of restrict that for their young ones.
So for the, Jeff, go ahead.
I was just I see the next questions lined up, but I did just want to add one thing in that right now we're talking very much at the individual level with some of the comments right now. And I just wanted to reflect the problem that we're facing here and the solutions that we need to embrace, I think have to apply both at the individual level and at the macro level as well. And I think the conversation that is happening more and more and what we're seeing bipartisan curiosity around is, what does meaningful legislation look like that helps align the incentives again? The incentives are misaligned right now between the financial interests of these huge companies and the general public. And there's a big question and curiosity around like what can be done to help align those incentives once again. So I think while all the individual actions, the recommendations that the person who asked the question was posing around how we handle it in our individual lives, we need to be thinking about all of those things. We have some resources on our website as well. So if you're curious, you could go to thesocialdilemma.com and see some resources there. But we have to think at the individual and at the societal level.
So just so the panelists know, and I'm not sure that we made this clear at the outset, we want to have a community discussion around this film. And that's why we put all this together. So we're going to try to stir that up for the entire community, have this conversation on the macro level, and see if we can, make some changes. I know we're running out of time. We're going to have perhaps two more questions from the audience.
Oh, I have a question. My name's Jory. I'm actually a middle school principal. Have been for 10 years. And in that time, I've just seen the evolution and the impact on young people. It used to be iPad shuffles that we would try to get them to tend to. And now it's just much more, there's much more connection. One thing that I am concerned for the impacts on the mental health of our youth. We're giving them a device and we're giving them access to the world. And one of the biggest, I would say that my biggest fear whenever Snapchat, this app Snapchat is involved, it's nearly always a very dark situation for our kids. There's very little accountability, or there's very little perception of accountability that comes with that particular app. And when you give it to a young child who's really, they're just now developing how to make connection among their peers. Right. Their peers are suddenly very important in their life. And we are just seeing all kinds of negative behaviors. And we really struggle in helping control that. We feel we don't have great proactive solutions to help our community with something like Snapchat. So just wondering if you have any, I mean, I know it's maybe a super difficult question, but when it comes to something like that and having a 12-year-old interact with it, how as a community do we regulate that?
Yeah. Really great question. And I empathize with the struggle that you feel in your school. There are some schools that we have learned about in the process of making this film where at the school, the students aren't allowed to have social media accounts. That might be a bit of a leap or rather extreme. In some cases, it might be perceived that way. I think part of this is, as was suggested before, how do we have the conversations with all the families and with the parents to align on what do we want our collective children's relationship with technology to be? One of the problems with Snapchat in particular, and this goes back to a lot of these particular platforms around what they have gamified. And I want to separate out the conversation for just a second around, this is not an anti-technology conversation. This is recognizing when certain types of technology have hijacked or manipulated the public and the users. And Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok are gamifying attention, as we were talking to. So kids can still have a text messaging group and still send videos back and forth and still be in a signal group. There are ways that youth can still connect with each other that aren't falling victim to the same negative consequences that we're seeing on Snapchat, for example. And the real concern that we've seen from the research that I've seen, at least, is that the criticism is around social media with youth, not screen time with youth. So I do want to separate those out for a second, because and Zoom fatigue is a real thing, and we can all get exhausted. And during COVID, it's been really, really challenging for everybody. But the mental health consequences in teenagers haven't been associated with the Zoom fatigue side as much as the social comparison side from social media.
So I just want to preface this that I'm not that old, but I started out with MySpace, and then I was one of like the first people to join on Facebook. And so I graduated with a degree in mass communications. And so got to be part of this evolution as we watched it go. And it was just for college students, and then businesses started to use it. It was a great PR tool, and then totally watched everything transform. And during the movie, you guys said that the algorithm is just going, it's doing whatever it's doing. And I wonder at what time people started to notice that they were having significant impacts, because as you watch this long-term growth throughout all these social media platforms, it almost seemed like years ago it was noticed, because I remember at one point I had posted pictures and I woke up the next morning on Facebook and saw that all these people I didn't know had started liking them. Like all of a sudden, everything started to try to be more of a linked community. And you started to see these recommendations of other people and following other people's feeds of what they like. So my question is, was there a notice early on that there was this problem like years ago and they tried to correct it, even though in the movie you said these people shouldn't be the ones correcting it? Did they try to? Did they notice it by trying to make us more communicated and connected by saying your friend like this and your friend like this, and started showing us these prompts along all social media trends that, trying to connect us instead of isolate us?
Maybe I'll
yeah, go for it.
Maybe I'll take that one. So you're correct that these recommendations and connecting people have been around for a while. I never saw, I had a role in that in some companies, and have not. There are other companies I've never, Facebook I've never worked at, so I can't say definitively, but I never saw that being built as some correction for a prior ill. That was built very simply for, if you look, these companies, like all corporations, are evaluated ultimately by how much profit they can generate and how fast they're growing. And the proxies for that are engagement and return usage and churning out. In the same way that if you buy one Pepsi and never buy another one again, that is worse for Pepsi than if you start buying 10 Pepsis a day. So all of these things, we notice that, hey, if we connect people, especially connect people that think similarly to one another, and we recommend content that people like you also like, you're very likely to like it. And if you see and engage with content every time you come to Facebook or Twitter, you're less likely to churn out and become what's called an idle user or a non-user. And so all of those things were added not to connect human beings more, but really just to get them using the product over and over and increase their overall usage.
I have 2 points I'd love to just add to that. There was a particular moment in time where I think there was a meaningful shift where a lot of these feeds went from chronological feeds, where you just saw everything that every friend that you knew posted in the order that they posted it, to a shift where, oh, let me figure out what's going to work for Alex best today. And let me look at all of this potential content and look at, like, there's so much content we can show. And maybe let's show them this one first and let's show this one, then we'll do that one. And that the algorithms can figure out a particular order that was most effective on Alex / all of us, right? So when it switched over from chronology to machine learning customization, that was like one of the big kind of tidal wave moments in that equation. But then just to piggyback on what Alex was sharing there around growth, these companies can just use software to optimize for growth. They literally just have algorithms saying, let's figure out how we can grow as quickly as possible. And the way I've started to think about it is, all of you people in this room right now, like the way the algorithm sees you all, you're just a dot in this like big matrix in this whole system. And like, if I can connect you to 4 people, every time you post, there are 4 potential connections. There are 4 potential ads I can see. But if I can connect you to 40 people, I just 10x that potential revenue for every ad, for every post. I look at it as like the growth algorithm is just trying to make as many connections and lines and dots happen with each other. Because now, if you have 1 million followers, the monetary opportunity of you posting something and 1 million people getting a ping in their pocket to say, hey, look at the thing that so-and-so posted. It's just trying to create as many connections in his nodes as possible in that whole system. Which is why we all feel so overwhelmed and exhausted by all of this, because now instead of you having your 15 friends that you speak with regularly, now you have just an infinite number of opportunities and access for anybody in the world to literally poke you in your pocket at any time to say, hey, look at this potential thing that's going to make the company more money.
And these are very intentional growth systems. So for example, has anyone ever received an email saying someone tagged you in a photo on Facebook? Has anyone ever gotten one of those? You ever wonder why they don't just put the photo in the email?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and it's not like they don't have the technology, like Mark Zuckerberg knows how to put photos in emails. This is only to get you to click to show up, because they found that once you click and show up, you don't actually just look at the photo and go away. You also you get stuck down the rabbit hole and you do all these other things. This is all very intentional. They're doing this only for that purpose, to get you doing more things, coming at, engaging. You might click on some ads after you look at the photo. You might forget that you were there to look at the photo and do some random other thing and build more connections. And that's all very intentional.
And none of that is like, intended to actually bring connection, satisfaction, and value back into your life. It is to bring your eyeballs to advertisements that Facebook or whatever company has promised it can manipulate you with. Like, their promise to their actual customers, the ad companies, is that they are very good at changing your mind and changing your behavior and figuring out exactly who will be vulnerable to which message at which time to shape real world outcomes, whether that's an election or, a company getting to sell some more sneakers. They are saying we have the power to find the right people on our huge platform and influence those people at the right time and change their minds and change their behavior without them even knowing that that's what we've done. And I think that, that's so everything is designed with that as the ultimate goal, because the ultimate goal, like you said, Alex, is to grow and to profit and to be successful in this sort of capitalistic sense of success. For me, this film has shined the light on the fact that all extractive industries are problematic. It's not just extracting from me that is a problem. And there's something fundamentally broken about the idea that we have to continue growing quarter after quarter forever. So I think, there's much bigger problems that we're sort of just barely scratching at the surface of as well.
Well, what a great theme to end on. And I know I speak for the entire group here when I say bless you for making this film, and thank you for this incredible, frank insight into not just the subject, but why you guys made the film. I want to thank you guys so much.
appreciate it all so much. Thank you for the work that you're doing as a community, and just grateful to be here and take part in this conversation. And on behalf of our team, we'd love to just hear also what happens after, as you guys go through these conversations and work to build bridges amongst all of you. Would love to hear what those outcomes are for your community.